You're looking at the pinnacle. That's what my brother Sean decided to call it. And 20 stories of glass and steel. 20 stories of glass and steel. A monument to his own ego piercing the city skyline. Tonight, from my small apartment window 2 blocks away, I can see the lights of the launch party on the rooftop. I can almost hear the faint thumping of the music, the murmur of 100 conversations, the clinking of champagne flutes, toasting his success. My brother Sean thinks this is the greatest night of his life. He thinks it's his coronation. He has no idea that I'm the one who's about to burn his empire to the ground. He has no idea that in approximately 10 minutes, the party will be over. Not just for tonight, but forever. It wasn't about revenge when I started this. It was about safety. It was about doing the right thing. But standing here, watching the glitter and the glam, feeling the cold glass of the window pane against my forehead, I have to admit, it started to be about revenge somewhere along the way, and I think I'm okay with that. My name is Molly, and for 32 years I've been the responsible one, the good daughter, the reliable sister, the family's quiet, unassuming safety net. While Sean was the dreamer, the risk-taker, the golden boy, I was the one balancing checkbooks, co-signing loans I shouldn't have, and answering panicked phone calls in the middle of the night. He got the praise. I got the thankless work of cleaning up his messes. Our entire family dynamic was a carefully constructed pyramid with Sean at the very top, and me as the broad, sturdy, and utterly invisible foundation. But a foundation can only bear so much weight before it cracks. My crack came a week ago, in his ridiculously opulent office on the top floor of a building that wasn't even his yet. I had come by to drop off some tax paperwork I had prepared for him, another one of those sisterly favors that had long ago stopped being favors and had simply become expectations. His assistant, a young woman who looked perpetually terrified, waved me in. Sean was on the phone, leaning back in a chair that cost more than my car, one polished Italian loafer propped up on his expansive oak desk. He was laughing, that big booming laugh he used to charm investors and disarm critics. He waved me toward a chair without looking at me, continuing his conversation. On his desk, amidst the clutter of blueprints and fancy pens, was a bound report. It was a preliminary structural analysis. I wasn't supposed to see it. It was just bad luck, or maybe fate, that his assistant had left it there instead of filing it away. My eyes, trained by years of being the family accountant and proofreader, scanned the summary page upside down. Words jumped out at me. Asterisk substandard rebar, tensile strength, asterisk significant variance in concrete composition, a rooftop load capacity calculations based on flawed initial material specs. My blood ran cold. I'm not an engineer, but I know what words like substandard and flawed mean when you're talking about a 20-story building. When he finally hung up the phone, a wide, self-satisfied grin on his face, I didn't even wait for him to ask what I wanted. I just pointed at the report. My voice was barely a whisper. "Sean, what is this?" He glanced at it, his grin not faltering in the slightest. "Oh, that. Just some preliminary stuff. The engineers are such worriers, Molly, always covering their backsides with worst-case scenario nonsense." "It doesn't sound like nonsense, Sean. It says the rebar might not be strong enough. It says the concrete is inconsistent." He finally swiveled in his chair to face me, his expression shifting from amusement to a familiar, weary condescension. It was the look he always gave me when I questioned him, the look that said, "Oh, Molly, with your little spreadsheets and your little worries. Molly, Molly, Molly," he said, shaking his head slowly, like he was explaining something to a child. "You handle the boring stuff. You're great at it. Numbers, papers, all that. Let me handle the real world. The real world runs on relationships, not reports. It runs on handshakes." "What does that even mean?" "The building code isn't a suggestion, Sean. People are going to live in this building. You're having a party on that rooftop. The report says the load capacity is based on flawed specs." And that's when he laughed. Not his charming laugh, but a short, sharp, ugly bark of a laugh. It was the most honest sound I had ever heard him make. It was a laugh that said I was naive, that I was stupid, that I knew nothing of the world he now inhabited. "Do you have any idea how things really get done in this city?" he asked, leaning forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial hush. "I have friends at the city inspection office. Good friends, Frank, Dale. These guys have been on my payroll, one way or another, for years. I could build a tower out of popsicle sticks and duct tape, and they would sign off on it. They get a nice Christmas bonus. Their kids' little league teams get new uniforms and my buildings get approved. That report," he said, tapping the cover with a manicured finger, "is for show. The real report, the one that goes into the official file, will say this building is the safest thing since Fort Knox. Now, did you bring my tax forms?" I just stared at him. The casual, smiling corruption, the utter disregard for the hundreds of people who would one day sleep in these apartments, trusting that the floor wouldn't collapse beneath them. The absolute, unshakable belief that he was above the rules, above consequences, above simple human decency. He wasn't just my arrogant, entitled brother anymore. He was a monster in $1,000 suit. I placed the folder with his tax documents on the corner of his desk, my hand shaking slightly. I didn't say another word. I just turned and walked out. He didn't notice my silence. He just called after me, his voice already distracted as he picked up his phone again. "Thanks, Mulls. You're a lifesaver." As the elevator doors slid shut, sealing me in a mirrored box that reflected my own pale, horrified face, I knew something had broken for good. The foundation hadn't just cracked, it had crumbled into dust. He mistook my kindness for weakness, my silence for acceptance. He was about to learn, in the most public way imaginable, how wrong he was. The lifesaver was about to become the storm. I went home to my small, quiet apartment, the one I could afford on my sensible salary as a forensic accountant. It was neat, orderly, and everything in it was paid for. It was my sanctuary from the chaos that always swirled around my family, the chaos that usually had Sean at its epicenter. But that day, the chaos followed me home. I shut the door, leaned my back against it, and for the first time in my adult life, I just slid down to the floor and wept. It wasn't a quiet, dignified cry. It was a raw, ugly, gut-wrenching sob that came from a place deep inside me I didn't even know existed. It was a grief for a brother I realized I never really had, and for a family that had never really seen me. Every dismissive comment, every forgotten birthday, every time my achievements were brushed aside to make room for his, came flooding back. It was a tidal wave of 1,000 tiny cuts that had finally culminated in this one giant, gaping wound. His laugh echoed in my ears. My friends at the city inspection office. It was the casual cruelty of it, the pride he took in his own deceit. He wasn't just cutting corners. He was actively, gleefully putting lives at risk for a bigger profit margin and bragging rights. My mind started to race, unspooling memories like an old film reel. I remembered when we were kids. Sean, charming and reckless, was the sun around which our family solar system revolved. When he was 12, he wanted a top-of-the-line mountain bike that cost a fortune. Our parents, Arthur and Eleanor, scraped the money together, even though it meant putting off fixing the leaky roof. He got a C- average that semester. My father clapped him on the back and said, "That's my boy out there hustling." That same year, I won the state-level math competition. I got a quiet, "Good job, honey," from my mother over dinner, before the conversation immediately shifted back to Sean's upcoming baseball tournament. My prize was a certificate and a $50 savings bond. His was the adoration of our parents. That was the exchange rate in our house. His charisma was worth more than my competence. Years later, when our father was laid off from his factory job, it was me, just 2 years out of college, who drained my savings to keep them afloat. I paid their mortgage for 6 months, bought their groceries, and told them not to worry about it. Where was Sean? He was building his network, which meant taking potential clients to expensive steak dinners he couldn't afford, driving a leased luxury car, and handing out business cards for a company that was, at that point, nothing more than a fancy letterhead. When I tentatively asked if he could maybe chip in, just a little, my mother pulled me aside in the kitchen, her face a mask of disappointment. "Molly, please," she whispered, her voice laced with that specific brand of guilt she was so good at wielding. "Don't put that pressure on him. He's on the verge of something big. This is his moment. You have a stable job. It's for the good of the family." It was always for the family, but the family was just a code word for Sean. My stability was never for me. It was a resource to be tapped to fund his instability. The first time he truly betrayed me, I was 25. I had painstakingly saved $10,000 as a down payment for my own condo. It was my escape plan, my ticket to a life that was finally my own. I kept the passbook in a shoebox in my closet. One day, it was just gone. I tore my apartment apart, my stomach churning with a sick dread. Finally, I called Sean. His voice was cagey. "Oh, that. Yeah, I had to borrow it, Malls. An investment opportunity came up. A sure thing. I'll pay you back double, I swear." He hadn't asked. He had gone into my apartment while I was at work and taken it. He had stolen from me. When I confronted him, shaking with a rage I had never felt before, he just gave me that same condescending smile. "It's not stealing when it's family. It's an investment in my future, which is our future." I went to our parents, expecting, for once, for them to be on my side. I was wrong. My father looked uncomfortable and stared at his shoes. My mother took Sean's side as always. "He made a mistake, Molly," she said, her tone final, but his intentions were good. "He's trying to build something for all of us. You need to learn to forgive. Holding on to anger is so unbecoming." I never saw a penny of that money again, and I didn't get my condo. I stayed in my little rental apartment, and the dream of something more just faded. I let it go because it was easier than fighting the entire family. I let it go because deep down, a part of me still believed the myth that one day, Sean's success would lift us all up, and my sacrifices would finally be acknowledged. That was the lie I told myself to make the injustice bearable. He mistook my forgiveness for permission. Lying there on my hardwood floor, the tears finally subsiding, replaced by a cold, hard clarity, I realized that I had been a fool. My sacrifices weren't investments. They were tribute, paid to a king who would never ever share his throne. He wasn't building something for the family. He was building it on top of me. My phone buzzed on the floor beside me. It was a text from my mother. It was a picture of Sean standing in front of the pinnacle, grinning from ear to ear. The caption read, "So proud of my boy. He's a star." And then, a second text, addressed to me. "Sean is so nervous about the party. Make sure you call and wish him luck. This is such a big night for the family." That word again, family. A word that was supposed to mean love, support, protection. For me, it meant obligation. It meant erasure. It meant standing in the wings while my brother took his bow in a spotlight I had helped pay for. A cold rage, so pure and so potent it felt like ice water in my veins, washed away the last of my grief. This wasn't just about a building anymore. It was about the $10,000. It was about the math competition. It was about every single time I had been told to be quiet, to be patient, to be the good daughter, while he got to be the son. It wasn't about revenge until it was. I picked up my phone. I didn't text my mother back. I didn't call Sean. I scrolled through my contacts until I found the one person who had been telling me the truth for years, my best friend Clara. I typed out a short, simple message. "You were right about everything." My phone rang less than 10 seconds later. Clara didn't even say hello. "Molly, what happened? What did he do now?" I told her everything. The report, the condescending laugh, the bragging about the inspectors. I told her about the text from my mother. I spoke in a flat, emotionless voice, all the tears having been squeezed out of me. When I was done, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Molly," Clara finally said, her voice dangerously calm. "You know what you have to do, right? This isn't just about your feelings anymore. This is criminally negligent. He could kill people." "I know," I whispered. "But what can I do? He said the inspectors are his friends. Who do I even go to? Not his friends, Clara said, and I could almost hear the gears turning in her head. Clara was a research journalist, and her mind was a beautiful, terrifying weapon. You go over their heads, you go to their boss. What's Surdy? What's a dead Borderelden? The Sal, or their boss's boss. You find the one person in that entire department who is not on his payroll, the one person who has a reputation to protect, and you give them a gift, an anonymous, career-making gift. But the report I saw was just a preliminary copy. He said the real report would be clean. I have no proof. Then you get the proof, she said simply. You said he mentioned firing an engineer who was a worrier's bullies and cheats always leave a trail of disgruntled people behind them. Find that person, Molly. Find the one person whose integrity cost them their job. I bet they kept receipts. A new feeling began to dawn inside me, pushing aside the cold rage. It was a sense of purpose, a quiet, methodical resolve. For my entire life, I had used my skills, my attention to detail, my patience for research, my ability to connect the dots, in service of my family. For Sean, now for the first time, I was going to use them for myself, or rather, I was going to use them against him. The family's bean counter was about to conduct the audit of a lifetime. The silent takeover had begun. The next morning, the city felt different. The sun glinting off the glass of the pinnacle didn't look like a beacon of success anymore. It looked like a warning. My grief had solidified overnight into something hard and sharp. I wasn't sad anymore. I was focused. Clara's words echoed in my mind. Find the person whose integrity cost them their job. My first step was to figure out who that was. Sean was careless. In his arrogance, he often complained about employees who didn't fall in line, seeing them not as professionals with standards, but as obstacles to his ambition. I scrolled through my memory, replaying conversations from the past few months. There was a family dinner about 3 months back, one of those command performance Sunday meals at my parents' house. It was the week after my mother Eleanor's birthday. I'd bought her a beautiful, expensive cashmere sweater she'd been admiring. She thanked me with a quick hug before spending 20 minutes showing everyone a cheap, gaudy bracelet Sean had given her, exclaiming over how he just had an eye for style. During that dinner, Sean had been venting. He was ranting about a dinosaur of an engineer who was holding up his timeline. This guy, David Albright, Sean had scoffed, spearing a piece of my mother's famous beef Wellington, the dish she only ever made to celebrate his victories. He's acting like he's building the pyramids, questioning every material spec, demanding triplicate forms for everything. He doesn't get it. Speed is money in this business. A week later, when I'd asked how things were going, Sean had just smirked and said, I got rid of the Albright problem, found a much more flexible engineering firm, David Albright. The name was my starting point. Forensic accounting teaches you how to find people who don't want to be found, and how to dig through digital paper trails. It took me less than an hour to find him. He wasn't hiding. He was a highly respected structural engineer with decades of experience, but his online professional profile showed he had recently left the large firm that Sean's company had contracted, and was now doing small-scale independent consulting. It looked like a step down, a significant one. It looked like what happens to someone who gets a reputation, fair or not, for being difficult. Getting to him was the delicate part. I couldn't just call him and say, Hi, my corrupt brother fired you. Can you help me ruin him? He'd hang up, and probably call his lawyer. I needed to approach him in a way that wouldn't spook him. I found an article he'd written for an industry journal about new composites in sustainable building. It was dense, technical, and perfect. I drafted an email to him from a generic, untraceable account. The subject line was question about your article on composite load-bearing structures. I wrote that I was an independent financial analyst researching the viability of green construction materials for a potential investment fund. I praised his article and asked if he might have 15 minutes to spare for a coffee, so I could ask a few follow-up questions. It was professional, plausible, and played to his ego as an expert. He replied within a day. He was cautious, but agreed to meet. We met at a sterile coffee shop downtown, halfway between his small suburban office and my apartment. He was older than I expected, with kind, tired eyes and the slightly rumpled look of a man who cared more about his work than his wardrobe. He carried a worn leather briefcase and ordered a black coffee. He was wary. His guard was up. I started by asking the questions I'd prepared about his article. I let him talk for 10 minutes, showing I'd actually read his work. I could see him start to relax, shifting from a defensive posture to that of a teacher happy to have an engaged student. Then I made my move. The reason I'm so interested in material integrity, I began, my heart starting to pound, is that I'm analyzing risk. A lot of new developments seem to prioritize speed and aesthetics over long-term structural soundness. It seems like a huge liability. Albright's eyes sharpened. He nodded slowly. You have no idea, he said, his voice low. It's the Wild West out there. Developers hire firms like my old one, and they pressure us from day one. They want the stamp, not the analysis. They find one thing they don't like, one costly recommendation, and they threaten to take their business elsewhere. I took a deep breath. Were you by any chance the lead engineer on the Pinnacle project? His face went blank. The friendly teacher vanished, replaced by a wall of stone. He started gathering his papers, his hands trembling slightly. I think this meeting is over, he said, his voice tight. I don't know what this is, but I don't talk about former clients. Please, I said, leaning forward, my own voice dropping to a whisper. Don't go. My name is Molly. Sean is my brother. That stopped him cold. He sank back into his chair, his expression a mixture of shock and deep, deep suspicion. Your brother? Yes, and I know what he did. I know he fired you because you wouldn't sign off on a doctored report. I was in his office. I saw the preliminary analysis, the real one. Albright just stared at me, his mouth a thin, hard line. He was trying to figure out the angle. Was I a threat? A spy? A trick? I decided that the only way forward was the absolute, unvarnished truth. I told him everything, not just about the building, but about Sean, about our childhood, about the stolen money, about the way he charmed and manipulated everyone in his path. I told him how Sean saw rules as suggestions and people as tools. I wasn't asking him as a professional source. I was appealing to him as a man of integrity, who had been wronged by the same person who had been wronging me my entire life. He's going to get people killed, I finished, my voice cracking slightly. He's hosting a party on that rooftop tonight, with investors, city people, all crowded onto a structure you know isn't safe. He laughed about it, Mr. Albright. He said his friends at the city would sign off on anything. For a long time he was silent. He just stirred his now cold coffee, his gaze fixed on the swirling black liquid. Finally he looked up at me, and the weariness in his eyes had been replaced by a familiar spark. It was the same cold, hard resolve I had felt rising in myself. He didn't just fire me, Albright said, his voice quiet but intense. He tried to ruin me. He told my firm I was incompetent, that I was costing them money. He threatened a lawsuit if they didn't remove me from the project. They buckled. I've been a structural engineer for 35 years. I've never had a single mark against my name, until your brother. He reached down and opened his worn briefcase. He pulled out a slim silver flash drive. I knew he would do this. I knew he'd find someone to create a fantasy report. So I kept a copy of everything. My original analysis, my field notes, the material test results from the lab, my official correspondence warning him about the deviations. It's all digitally watermarked and time-stamped. He slid the flash drive across the table. It felt as heavy as a brick. I was afraid to use it. A man like your brother, he has money, lawyers. He could have buried me in litigation for years for breaking my non-disclosure agreement. I have a family. I couldn't risk it. You won't have to, I said, my hand closing around the drive. This will be completely anonymous. It will come from a place he can never trace. It won't be about you. It will be about public safety. He looked at me, a long, searching look. He's your brother. Are you sure you can do this? I thought of his laugh. I thought of my mother's text. I thought of 32 years of being invisible. I've never been more sure of anything in my life, I said. That afternoon, Clara came over to my apartment. We huddled over my laptop like war room generals. We plugged in the flash drive. It was all there. Page after page of damning evidence. Albright was meticulous. He had photos of cracked concrete pours, delivery receipts for rebar that didn't match the architectural specs, and a chain of emails where he repeatedly warned Sean's project manager, only to be told to make it work. It was an open and shut case of willful criminal negligence. Okay, Clara said, rubbing her hands together. We can't just dump this on the media. Sean will spin it as a disgruntled employee. We need a surgical strike. She started digging into the city's organizational chart. The inspectors Sean mentioned, Frank and Dale, are mid-level guys. They're part of the old guard, easily bought. We have to leapfrog them. Her fingers flew across the keyboard. Aha, she said. Here we go. The director of the Department of Buildings, appointed 18 months ago, after a bribery scandal took down her predecessor. Her name is Maria Evans. Her public mandate is to restore integrity and public trust. She's a former federal prosecutor. She's unbuyable. Director Maria Evans. She was our target. We spent the next hour crafting the email. It had to be perfect. The subject line was Clara's stroke of genius. You are urgent and confidential. Imminent public safety risk. At the pinnacle. 245 Glass Quay Drive. Evidence attached. The body of the email was short and to the point. We wrote it from the perspective of a terrified anonymous city employee who had stumbled upon the real report and feared reprisal. Director Evans, I am writing to you anonymously because I fear for my job. I have discovered a profound discrepancy between the official inspection report filed for the Pinnacle and the original structural engineering analysis. The attached file was prepared by the project's initial lead engineer, David Albright, before he was summarily dismissed. The report details critical failures in materials and construction that compromise the building's integrity, most critically the rooftop terrace. There is a large corporate event scheduled on that terrace tonight. Based on Mr. Albright's calculations, the structure may not be able to support the live load of such a gathering. I know your commitment to public safety is absolute. I trust you will know how to act on this information without exposing its source. This goes far beyond simple corruption. This is a potential catastrophe in the making. We attached Albright's entire file as a single encrypted zip folder. My hand hovered over the mouse for a second. This was it, the point of no return. I looked at Clara. She just nodded. I clicked send. The silent takeover was in motion. The first domino had fallen, and it was heading straight for my brother's rooftop party. The next few hours were the longest of my life. The party was scheduled to start at 7. I had sent the email at 3 o'clock. There was nothing to do now but wait. I paced my small apartment, a knot of anxiety and exhilaration tightening in my stomach. Every siren I heard in the distance made my heart leap. Clara had gone home, promising to be on standby. It was just me and my thoughts. I kept picturing the email landing in Director Evans's inbox. Would she even see it? Would she dismiss it as a prank? My phone rang at 5:17 p.m. The caller ID said CN. My breath caught in my throat. It was happening. I let it ring 3 times just to steady my nerves, then answered, schooling my voice to sound flat and bored. Hey, I said. Molly. Hey. His voice was tight, stretched thin. The usual booming confidence was gone, replaced by a high-strung, nervous energy. Weird question for you. Super weird. You're home, right? Yeah, just making dinner. Why? I was in fact staring at a box of takeout lo mein I had no appetite for. Right. Dinner. Good. He was rambling. Listen, you didn't happen to mention that silly report to anyone, did you? That thing you saw in my office? Because we're getting some strange calls from the city. Some bureaucrat is getting their panties in a twist over some paperwork. It's ridiculous. I made my voice as innocent as I could. What report, Sean? I have no idea what you're talking about. I've been working on year-end accounts all week. You know how it is. I used the language he understood. The language of the boring stuff I handled. There was a pause. I could hear him breathing on the other end of the line. He was probing, trying to see if I would flinch. Yeah, of course, the accounts. He didn't believe me, but he couldn't prove anything. My calm denial was more unnerving to him than a screaming confession would have been. He couldn't get a read on me, and for a man who controlled everything and everyone, that was terrifying. He was losing his grip. It's just some of the language they're using, he continued, the panic starting to leak through his forced casualness. It sounds a little like the stuff in that preliminary draft. You didn't keep a copy of that, did you, Sean? Why on earth would I keep a copy of your engineering reports? I told you, I don't understand that stuff. It's your world. I turned his own condescending words back on him like a knife. Right, right. Of course not. Stupid question. He was trying to convince himself. Listen, I gotta go. The first investors are starting to arrive. Just, if anyone calls you asking questions, you don't know anything. Okay, for the family. Okay, Sean, I said softly. You have a great party. I hung up the phone. My hand was perfectly steady. The silence in my apartment was absolute, and in that silence, I felt a power I had never known, the power of being underestimated. I knew what was happening on his end as if I were a fly on the wall. Director Evans, the former prosecutor, would not have delegated. She would have seen the words imminent public safety risk and acted immediately. She would have bypassed Sean's friends, Frank and Dale. They were probably being interviewed in a windowless room right now, sweating under the glare of departmental investigators. Evans would have dispatched her own team, the A-team, the people she brought in to clean house. They wouldn't be swayed by charm or backroom deals. They would operate on facts, and I had given them a briefcase full of them. Sean's panic was a confirmation. My missile had hit its target. He was trying to plug a hole in a dam with his thumb, not realizing the entire structure was about to collapse. He thought it was a paperwork problem, a bureaucratic snafu. He still couldn't conceive of a world where his charm and his money wouldn't be enough to fix things. He still thought he was in control. At 6:45 p.m., my phone rang again. This time it was my mother, Eleanor. Her voice was frantic, a high-pitched screech of maternal terror. Molly, what have you done? I didn't pretend to be stupid this time. What are you talking about, Mom? Sean just called me. He's in a panic. He said the city is trying to shut down his party. He said it's your fault. He said you spoke to someone. The blame had been officially shifted. Of course, it was never Sean's fault. It was always someone else's. Usually it was mine. Molly, you have to fix this, she wailed. Your brother has worked so hard for this. All those years of struggle, all his dreams are riding on tonight. How could you be so selfish, so jealous? The words were meant to be daggers, the same daggers she had used my whole life to keep me in line. Selfish, jealous. But they didn't hurt anymore, they were just words. They glanced off the new armor I was wearing. Jealous? I said, my voice dangerously quiet. Jealous of what, Mom? His willingness to commit fraud, his decision to endanger hundreds of lives for money. Is that what you're so proud of? There was a sputtering on the other end of the line. He would never. You're exaggerating. You're being dramatic. It's just business, Molly. You don't understand these things. I understand that the building is a death trap, I said, my voice hard as steel. And I understand that you and Dad have spent 30 years celebrating his recklessness while punishing my responsibility. So no, I won't be fixing this. This is not my mess. I could hear my father, Arthur, yelling in the background. Then he was on the phone, his voice a low growl of paternal authority that had never once been directed at his son. Molly, this isn't how we raised you. We are a family. That means you protect your own. I don't know who you spoke to, but you will call them back right now, and you will tell them you made a mistake. You will tell them you lied. The sheer audacity of it left me breathless. He was asking me to commit a crime, to obstruct an investigation, to protect the son who was actively breaking the law, all under the banner of that hollow, meaningless word, family. A strange calm settled over me. It was the calm of a captain who has already decided to scuttle the ship and is just waiting for the water to rise. No, Dad, I said. my voice even. "I will not be doing that. Don't you take that tone with me, young lady. The time for you to take that tone was when Sean stole my life savings." I cut in, my voice sharp and clear, brooking no interruption. "The time for you to talk about protecting family was when I was paying your mortgage, but you didn't. You told me to be quiet. You told me to support him. Well, I'm done. I'm done being the foundation for this rotten house you all built. My money, my help, my time, my silence. Consider all of those services permanently canceled. You wanted me to support the family. The family is now Sean's problem. You have his number." And for the second time that night, I hung up on a member of my family. I walked over to the window. The party on the Pinnacle's rooftop was in full swing now. Tiny figures milled about, bathed in the glow of purple and gold uplighting. The music was louder, a confident, throbbing beat. It was the sound of a party that had no idea it was about to end. It was the sound of my brother's world, just seconds before it imploded. The moment the first domino fell, when I hung up on Sean, the power dynamic in my world had fundamentally shifted. For decades, my family operated on a simple, unspoken principle. Molly is the shock absorber. Any financial trouble, any emotional crisis, any logistical nightmare created by Sean or my parents would ultimately be my problem to solve. I was the backstop, the emotional and often financial sponge that soaked up the consequences of their irresponsibility. My compliance was the currency that kept their dysfunctional world spinning. By hanging up that phone, by refusing to be the fixer, I had in essence declared their currency worthless. The frantic call from my mother, followed by my father's blustering demands, was the first sign that they understood this. It wasn't just about the party anymore. It was an extinction-level event for their way of life. Their panic wasn't just for Sean, it was for themselves. Who would they call when the next crisis hit? Who would bail them out, listen to their complaints, and quietly clean up the mess, all while being told it was for the good of the family? The exodus wasn't physical, not yet. It was an exodus of my support, my energy, my very presence as their safety net, and they were terrified. I imagined the scene at their house. My mother, Eleanor, would be weeping, twisting a handkerchief in her hands, lamenting my betrayal and my jealousy. My father, Arthur, would be pacing, his face red with impotent fury, unable to comprehend how his authority, which he had never really used for anything good, had just evaporated. They were realizing, perhaps for the first time, that their golden boy, their brilliant son, had no actual substance. He was a hollow man, propped up his entire life by my silent sacrifice and their willful blindness. Without me holding up the scaffolding, he was nothing, and so were they. They tried to manipulate me one last time. An hour after my father's call, I received a string of texts. The first was from Eleanor. "Molly, I'm begging you, as your mother. You are destroying your brother. You are destroying this family. Is that what you want, to be all alone?" The second was from Arthur. "You have made your point. Now it's time to be the bigger person. Your mother is a wreck. Think about her health. Call this off." It was their classic pincer movement. My mother with the emotional guilt, my father with the appeal to a higher moral ground he himself had never occupied. For years it had worked every single time. The thought of my mother being upset, the idea that I was not being the bigger person, would have sent me into a spiral of guilt, and I would have caved. But not anymore. I read the texts and felt nothing. It was like reading a script from a play I was no longer in. Their words had no power over me. The charade was over. I simply turned my phone to silent and placed it face down on the kitchen counter. My real family, I thought, was Clara, who had checked in with a simple text. "Thinking of you. You got this." And David Albright, a man I barely knew, but with whom I shared a bond of truth. My blood relatives had become strangers. I turned my attention back to the window, to the rooftop of the Pinnacle. It was 7:55 p.m. The investors would be there, the movers and shakers. Sean was always so desperate to impress. They would be drinking his expensive champagne, eating his fancy hors d'oeuvres, and listening to him spin his grand vision for the future. He would be at the center of it all, a king on his throne, perhaps having convinced himself that the phone calls were just a minor hiccup, that his friends would handle it. He had an almost pathological belief in his ability to talk his way out of anything. He believed his own hype. But hype can't fix substandard rebar. Charm can't reinforce a bad weld. The laws of physics are immune to my brother's charisma, and director Maria Evans, I suspected, was equally immune. The power shift was complete. I held all the cards, and the only card I had left to play was silence. I just had to sit and wait and watch. The real showdown wasn't going to be between me and Sean. It was going to be between Sean's fantasy and cold, hard reality, and reality was about to make a grand entrance. At precisely 8:02 p.m., it happened. From my vantage point, I saw the main elevator doors on the rooftop terrace slide open, but it wasn't more guests who emerged. It was a group of 5 people, even from 2 blocks away. Their purpose was unmistakable. 2 were in the dark blue uniforms of city police officers. The other 3 were in suits, but they carried themselves with a different kind of authority. They had hard hats under their arms, and one was holding a large, official-looking clipboard. They moved with a calm, deliberate purpose that immediately cut through the party's festive atmosphere. I couldn't hear the words, but I could see the effect. The music, a loud electronic beat, abruptly stopped. A ripple of confusion spread through the crowd. Heads turned. Conversations faltered. I saw Sean, who had been holding court near the edge of the terrace, a champagne flute in his hand, freeze mid-sentence. His smile vanished. The color drained from his face. He looked like a man who had just seen a ghost. One of the men in the suits, a tall man with graying hair, who I assumed was the lead inspector, approached my brother. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. His presence was enough. He spoke to Sean for a moment, then held up the clipboard and pointed to something on the page. Sean started talking, gesturing wildly. He was trying to charm them. He was trying to bluster. I saw him pull out his phone, probably to call one of his friends, but the inspector simply shook his head and said something that made Sean put the phone away. Then the inspector turned to the crowd. He spoke, and even though I couldn't hear him, I could read the reaction. Confusion turned to alarm. People started backing away from the center of the terrace. An investor in a sharp tuxedo pointed angrily at Sean. Another one was on her phone, her face a mask of fury. The party was over. The spell was broken. The king had been dethroned in his own throne room, in front of the very court he was so desperate to rule. The inspectors and the police began to calmly herd people toward the elevators. It was an evacuation. A quiet, orderly, and deeply humiliating evacuation. Sean just stood there, frozen, amidst the controlled chaos. His $1 million party, the culmination of all his dreams, was being dismantled piece by piece by a man with a clipboard. He looked small. He looked powerless. He looked exactly like what he was, a fraud who had finally been caught. My phone, still on the counter, began to vibrate. I knew who it was. I walked over, picked it up, and turned the ringer back on. The screen glowed with his name. I let it vibrate in my hand for a moment, feeling the frantic energy coming through the device. Then I answered. "Hello, Sean," I said. My voice was calm. His voice was a choked, strangled whisper, the sound of a man gasping for air. "You," he breathed. "You did this." I looked out the window. I could see him standing there, his phone pressed to his ear, a lone, pathetic figure on his empty, condemned rooftop. The glittering lights of the city that he had wanted to conquer now seemed to mock him. I thought about all the things I could say. I could have screamed at him. I could have listed every betrayal, every lie, every time he had made me feel small and insignificant. I could have told him about David Albright. I could have told him about the $10,000. I could have spent an hour detailing exactly how he had brought this all on himself. But I didn't. I had learned from him, you see. I had learned the power of a single, well-placed, devastating action over 1,000 useless words. The real power wasn't in the argument. It was in the result. So I just said 2 words. "No, Sean." I paused, letting the silence hang in the air between his ruined rooftop and my quiet apartment. "You did." Then I hung up. I didn't slam the phone down. I just pressed the red icon on the screen, severing the connection. I ended the call. I ended our relationship. I ended the person I used to be. And then I did something I hadn't done in a very, very long time. I laughed. It wasn't his kind of laugh, not cruel or arrogant. It was a laugh of pure, unadulterated, and deeply satisfying release. The weight of my family was finally gone, and I was free. In the weeks and months that followed, Sean's world didn't just crumble, it was systematically vaporized. The rooftop party shutdown was only the beginning. It was the public execution that led to the slow, methodical autopsy of his entire business. Director Evans's investigation was as thorough as it was ruthless. The pinnacle was declared structurally unsound and cordoned off, a 20-story tombstone for my brother's career. The investors, a famously unforgiving bunch, didn't just pull their funding. They filed a massive lawsuit against Sean for fraud and misrepresentation, seeking to claw back every penny they had poured into his monument of lies. Then came the criminal charges. The district attorney, smelling a high-profile case that was a political slam dunk, charged Sean with multiple counts of reckless endangerment, conspiracy to defraud, and bribery. His friends at the city, Frank and Dale, had turned on him in an instant, cooperating with the prosecution in exchange for lighter sentences. They painted a picture of a man so consumed by greed and arrogance that he was willing to risk a catastrophe for a slightly better profit margin. They weren't wrong. My parents, of course, were collateral damage in the explosion. Their world, which was so inextricably linked to Sean's success, collapsed right alongside his. They called me, at first, dozens of times. They left voicemails that cycled through the stages of grief, denial, then anger, then desperate, wheedling bargaining. My mother left sobbing messages about how they were going to lose their house to pay for Sean's legal fees. My father left angry, rambling threats about disowning me, which was laughable, since I had already disowned them. Finally, I changed my number. I cut the last cord. I heard through Clara, who had a morbid curiosity for following the fallout, that they did in fact have to sell their home. The comfortable suburban house where I had been raised to be invisible was sold to pay for the defense of the son they had raised to be a king. There was a certain karmic poetry to it that I couldn't deny. They had invested everything in him, and their returns were exactly what they deserved: nothing. As for me, my new reality was defined by a single beautiful word: silence. The silence of my phone, not ringing with a new crisis. The silence of my email inbox, free from passive-aggressive demands disguised as family updates. The silence in my own head, no longer filled with the static of resentment and the burden of unspoken truths. I took the money I had been saving, the money that was no longer earmarked for a potential family bailout, and I bought a plane ticket. I went to Italy for a month. I walked through ancient streets, ate pasta in tiny family-run trattorias, and sat by the sea, watching the waves without thinking about anything at all. I met a man named Matteo, a kind-eyed architect, who laughed when I told him my brother was a contractor. We had a wonderful, fleeting romance that was more about rediscovering myself than it was about him. It was a reminder that there was a world outside the suffocating confines of my family, a world where I could just be Molly, not Sean's sister, or the responsible one. When I came back, I felt like a different person. The bitterness was gone, replaced by a quiet, settled peace. The vindication I felt watching Sean's party get shut down had been sharp and sweet, like a shot of whiskey. But the real victory, the lasting one, was the peace that followed. It wasn't about his failure, it was about my freedom. I reconnected with David Albright for a final coffee. He was back at his old firm, his reputation restored, and then some. He was a hero, the man who tried to blow the whistle. He thanked me, but I told him it was I who owed him thanks. We were two quiet people who had found our voices at the same time. For years I believed that my role, my duty, was to be the glue that held my family together. I thought my patience was a virtue, and my silence was a form of love. But standing here now, in my same small apartment that feels so much bigger these days, I understand the truth. My silence wasn't love. It was fuel. It was the oxygen that allowed their dysfunction to burn. I wasn't holding them together. I was enabling their slow collective self-destruction, and by extension, my own. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself, at least, is to let things fall apart. You have to let the rotten structure collapse under the weight of its own lies. You can't set yourself on fire to keep others warm, especially when they're the ones who keep handing you the matches. My family got what they deserved. But the real win, the thing I want you to take away from this, isn't the satisfaction of watching them fall. It's the profound, life-altering peace that comes from realizing you can finally stand on your own 2 feet, without the weight of the world, or at least, their world, on your shoulders. So I have to ask you, have you ever been the responsible ones in your family? Have you ever been the quiet foundation for someone else's ego? When was the moment you realized your kindness was being mistaken for weakness? I truly want to know. Share your story in the comments below, because I've learned that sharing these truths is how we take our power back. And if you want to hear more stories about people finally breaking free and getting the justice they deserve, make sure you like this video and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for listening.